Welcome to the Carousel of Happiness podcast. I'm your host, Allie Wagner. On last week's episode, we had a special edition of the podcast. We were joined by guest host Sidzi Powell, who's been sitting down with business owners from the Caribou Village Shopping Center to share their memories and their stories. On last week's episode, Sidzi sat down with Claudia Schaffler, owner of The Shop, a clothing store specializing in new and used mountain fashion. You learned how The Shop was Claudia's plan for retirement and how she made the jump from healthcare career to clothing boutique owner. On today's episode, we're going to talk about a feature of the Carousel called the Somewhere Else wall. A stuccoed wall between the Carousel and the gift shop that Scott designed in 2011 that has animals moving in and out of it. We'll talk about how it represents a portal, a doorway, a bridge, so to speak, between those of us who are here and those of us who are somewhere else. On today's episode, I'll tell you more about the wall, what it represents, and I'll share my own personal experience with connecting to that place we call somewhere else. This is part one of a two-part episode where I'll tell you a story about how I started receiving messages from my mother, who passed away in 2010. I'll tell you what she told me, what those messages have meant to me, and how she's helped guide me to a very important creative idea. On today's episode, you'll hear about how one particular message from my mother inspired me to reach out to a professional medium to interview for this podcast. You'll hear how excited I was to interview him, that is, until the day before, when I completely lost my voice. Next week, I'll share my conversation with that professional medium, author, speaker, and evidential medium, Travis Holp. You'll hear what losing my voice taught me about the value of messy stories, why signs matter, and how the stories we tell now can shape our future. Plus, you'll hear from Travis on how we can connect with our loved ones on the other side, what death can teach us about life, and how being genuine rather than authentic is his suggestion for showing up as our best selves in this lifetime. Let us begin with today's story. There's a spot in the Carousel house we haven't talked about yet. A spot that, I must confess, is my personal favorite. On the north side of the building between the Carousel and the gift shop is a stuccoed wall with a large heading that reads, "Somewhere Else." Below the sign, animals move seemingly in and out of the wall. The wall appears to be a thoroughfare of some kind, a passageway or a portal. You see a penguin marching confidently into the wall while a giraffe peers its head out. Just above the penguin, a pelican flies out of the wall, wings wide, as a human foot walks in and out. Some animals here on this side of the wall and some animals on the other side of it, seemingly somewhere else. At the center of the wall itself, we see a big polar bear, and she's lifting her cub up into the air toward a pair of outstretched grizzly bear claws reaching from the other side. Next to the polar bear stands a sheepdog. That's Oberon, the wonder dog, to be specific, partly inside the wall and partly coming out of it. The Somewhere Else wall wasn't built with the original Carousel of Happiness. It was a project Scott conceived of in the fall of 2011, about a year and a half after the carousel had been opened. Scott wanted to create a space that acknowledged that some of us are here and some of us are somewhere else. He doesn't specifically say where this somewhere else place is. That's up to you. Somewhere else could be the place we go when we dream. Somewhere else could be a parallel universe we cannot see. Somewhere else could be where we come from when we are born, or it could be where we go after we die. People of every culture and society have perceived and believed in such a place throughout the course of human history. And we all have our own special words for it. Heaven, the afterlife, paradise, Never Never Land, the multiverse, consciousness, the field, source, or, in the case of the Carousel of Happiness, somewhere else. At the Carousel of Happiness, the wall is a place for honoring and acknowledging our loved ones who are not here. Inside the wall itself are two small openings Scott intentionally created as a place for people to place mementos or send messages to loved ones who are no longer here. A man who lost his wife put her ashes in the wall. 2 combat veterans placed an artifact from a friend they lost in Afghanistan in the wall. The polar bear protects photos of 2 women, sisters, who died young and whose mother wanted to honor their memory, all inside the wall. I've been thinking a lot this week about stories. I believe the stories we tell ourselves and the ones we tell each other are important. In telling stories, we craft the narrative of our own lives. In telling stories, we decide which details to include and which to omit. In telling stories, we can be the star of the show, the main character, or even the villain. Stories have always been a part of my life. For as long as I can remember, I have told stories. Stories to entertain, stories to amuse, stories to get published, stories to make a point, stories to teach, stories to understand, and yes, stories to hurt. Stories that hurt me. Stories that hurt others. Messy stories. Stories without clean endings. Stories without clear beginnings. Stories on repeat. Stories on loop. Stories where the cast and scenery changes, but the root of the story remains the same. Stories where I learn nothing. Stories where nothing changes. And I have this recurring story. One where it is not safe for my voice to be heard. Where I need to be small and quiet in order to make those around me feel safe. It's a story I learned from my mother. She told it to me every single day, like a bedtime story. She told it to me through her words and through her actions. She told me that it was best for everyone if I just toned it down a little, made a little less noise, talked a little bit less. And it's a story that has repeated throughout my life in many ways. In the past, I have been unheard in relationships, not listened to at work. Even now, my poor dear husband can't hear me most of the time. It is not his fault, despite how grumpy it makes me. It is my fault. This is my story, and he's showing me that story in real time. He is the mirror showing back to me what stories still linger within me. The story that I need to be small and quiet to make others feel okay is still active. The story that it is not safe for me to show who I really am. The story that it is best to figure out what someone wants of me and to give them that at the expense of my own truth. And the thing about this story is that it's on autopilot at this point. This story is currently a computer program running underneath the surface of my experience. Over and over again, small and quiet keeps you safe. Hide yourself, you'll be safe. And even though I know on an intellectual level, a conscious level, that this story does not serve me, it does not stop it from influencing my life in ways I wish it wouldn't. That is because my sweet little subconscious, bless its little heart, does anything in its power to protect me from being unsafe, because that is its job. Which is why I was not surprised, though I was disappointed, when I lost my voice the day before I was about to take a very big step forward in the direction of my most authentic expression. 2 months after the Carousel opened, at the end of July 2010, I went to a friend's house for a slumber party. We were all in our 20s, working for the government at the time, and work had gotten really stressful. So we decided to get together, hang out, cut loose, and give ourselves at least one night without our phones being on. So we turned off our phones, pumped up the jams, so to speak, and poured out the wine. We laughed, we ate, we danced, and yes, we told stories. The next morning, I woke up and I turned on my phone. No calls from work, thank goodness. But there were 13 missed calls from my younger brother, which is rare. In fact, any type of call from my younger brother is noteworthy. 13 missed calls was significant. And he didn't leave a message, so I called him back. When he answered, I said to him, "What is up with all the calls? Who died?" "Mom," he said to me. My mother, Barbara Lee Hinson, died 15 years ago at the age of 55. For the longest time, my mother was featured in many of my stories, usually as a villain, alternatively as a martyr, but typically as an excuse for whatever naughty thing I was doing at any particular moment. But all that changed one day, last year, when we welcomed a delegation from Colombia to the Carousel of Happiness. The visiting group was comprised of military and police officials whose job it was to address the human side effects of the war on drugs in that country. The PTSD, the broken families, the lost loved ones. And Scott said something to the delegation that day that I really needed to hear. Now, it's been a while, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, but what I remember from that moment is his encouragement not to hold on to that definition of being a victim. While it can be very tempting to hold on to our identity as a person who has been wronged, that clutching keeps the victimhood active in our present moment. This, by the way, is now my interpretation of what he said. That clutching to your identity as someone who has been wronged keeps you tied to that thing that done you wrong. Right now, No matter how long ago the original event took place, it still maintains its power over you if you're holding on to it like a life raft, which is what I was still doing at the time. Again, this is me paraphrasing what I heard that day. And I realized in that moment that while both of my parents were gone, their impact on my life remained the same because I was holding on to that identity as a victim. As a person who was wronged, I wore that name tag like a badge of honor. And each moment that I used them as an excuse not to live the life I was born to live, it didn't feel so good. And when I felt that not so good feeling, I pointed at them and I blamed them for it. But the truth is, I was the one responsible. Not for the original thing that happened way back when, but for using that thing right now as the excuse not to live my life fully. That is on me. So I decided to set it down. Set down my identity as a victim, as a person who was wronged, because carrying it around was getting really, really heavy and unwieldy and no longer sustainable. Shortly after that day with the Colombians, something happened that changed everything. I was writing in my journal, as I do every morning, and out of nowhere, I heard a voice. A voice was coming from inside my head, and it sounded like my voice, but I knew for a fact that it didn't belong to me. So I kept writing, turning my pen toward this voice. I started scribbling down questions and waiting for the voice to answer. I asked it questions like, who are you? And am I going crazy? And that's when I saw my hand write these words. It is me, your mother. And I knew in that moment, without any doubt, I knew that it was true. I knew because I felt this wash of relief. I knew because my entire body relaxed. I knew because I took a big, deep breath. I just knew. Since then, my mom and I have had several conversations. She gives me pep talks when I need them. She gives me grief when I need it. It's like old times, but way, way better. Because I now know she was in so much pain when she was in her physical body. And the pain she felt when she was alive, it's no longer active. I know now, as a result of talking to her, that she's free. Free to be the mom I always wanted her to be. Free to be the mom she always wanted to be. Not being in a physical body has allowed her not to get so bogged down in the complexity of her humanness. In her form now, she can show up for me in ways she just simply couldn't when she was alive. In our conversations, she's told me what it was like for her during difficult times in our lives. She shared with me how painful some of those things were for her. And what's interesting is that this all sounds sort of sad, but the experience of hearing it has been so incredibly healing. As a result of our conversations, I've been able to tap into a level of compassion for her in a way I never could access when she was alive. It was all too close, too real, and I was too young. There's something about connecting with her now that allows me to access her from a place of pure love. That is the advantage of connecting to your loved ones in spirit, in my experience. The channel cannot be opened without pure love. And holding that love at the same time as you hear about the pain somehow transmutes it. For the most part, I've kept our connection to myself until now, sharing it only with a few people because I know grief is complicated and we all have our own unique beliefs about what happens when we go somewhere else. And I want to be clear. You do not need to believe a word I am saying. If this story feels like it's butting up against your beliefs in an uncomfortable way, please stop this episode immediately. I am sharing this story not to convince you, but because it is mine to tell. Because it belongs to me. And I have an undeniable need to express this story in this lifetime. And working for the Carousel of Happiness has opened me up just like it has opened so many people before me. Not necessarily in this way, of course, but I think that's the magic of the Carousel. The Carousel meets you where you are. The Carousel, if you want it to, if you let it, can guide you toward your version of who you want to be. I've always known there is a carousel type project for me slated in this lifetime. Not necessarily a carousel, of course, but a lifelong expressive project that feels unique to me. I am not a builder. I am not a carver, but I am a storyteller. I am a feeler. I am a connector of dots, a searcher for meaning. I sit with stories the way Scott sits with wood, making decisions. Do I cut this detail out? Does this still work for me? Moment after moment, chiseling away what does not serve and sculpting a new story. And it's been through the course of this podcast that I've had the opportunity to notice where my old stories, the ones that no longer serve, linger. It is through this podcast that I've been able to realize where I've been clinging to identities and beliefs that are not in my best interest. As my husband will tell you, been a bit bumpy, clumsy, awkward, dare I say, sometimes unpleasant. I am in the quote-unquote rabbit the first zone of my creative expression, as it were. But I fumbled my way through using the carousel as an energetic guidepost, if you will. Using Scott's story as a way to relate to my own. But up until recently, I still didn't know what my quote-unquote carousel was. What my lifelong creative expression was. That is until one day when my mom told me. About a month ago, my mom told me she wanted to help me write a book. A memoir, to be specific. But a different kind of memoir. Not one that looks backward toward what happened, but one that looks forward. A reverse memoir, so to speak. One where I can use my storytelling skills to change my life in the future rather than use them to recount events that happened before. And the memoir specifically is about a skill I have, an ability, a unique to me gift, something that I had when I was younger, but stopped expressing because of a story I was told by my mother, who, as it turns out, also had this skill, this gift. But this gift wanted more from her than she was able and willing to give in this lifetime. The gift did not feel like a gift to her. It felt like a crushing burden. And in her lifetime, she did what any mother would do. She tried to protect her daughter the best she could from the exact same pain. Until now. I appreciate you holding space for this story, even if it sounds vague, even if it doesn't make sense, even if you don't believe it. I am discovering that the messages I receive from somewhere else sometimes aren't that specific. Sometimes they sound like riddles. Sometimes I only get fragments or pieces, only to forget them almost immediately as they came. I'm told it's because I'm still learning how to listen, how to connect. And the better I get at it, the clearer the messages will become. But for right now, I know I'm writing a book about me and my mother, about what we as human beings can create here in this lifetime with the help of our loved ones somewhere else. 3 days after I received that message from my mother, I had a bold idea. There's a medium I follow on Instagram that I really, really like. His name is Travis Holp, and when I found out Travis was going to be doing a live mediumship demonstration as part of a metaphysical fair down in Lakewood, I sent him an email. Out of the blue. Explained who I was and that I wanted to interview him for this podcast. Why? I don't know. Because I wanted to. Because it sounded fun. Because 3 days before I had the idea, I received a very cryptic and prophetic message from my mother on the other side. Surely, talking to a professional medium would be a good idea. This makes sense. And what I've personally learned from Scott is how important it is just to go with it. Whatever it is, if it sounds fun, if it's what you want to do, if it amuses you or it lights you up, chances are pretty good the outcome will be good. Why? Because that's what he did. Over and over again, making choices that didn't necessarily make sense to anyone else, but felt good at the time. Some of the most beloved details about the Carousel of Happiness are these silly little details Scott just added because he wanted to. So I sent an email to Travis, and within minutes, he responded. He loved the idea and thought it would be fun to record the podcast live at the event itself. Great. I had never done a live podcast before, but it still sounded fun. A little scary, I'll admit, but mostly fun. Travis checked in with the event's organizer to see if it'd be okay, and wait for it. Turns out, the organizer, Ari Honeyford, is from Netherlands. She graduated from Netherlands High School the exact same year as Scott's daughter, Colleen. Are you kidding me? This was obviously a sign. So, plans were set into motion. I buzzed around all week, getting myself ready, organizing my equipment, reading Travis's new book, planning my questions, and everything was perfect until Friday, the day before the interview. While it is true I had gathered all of my equipment and organized my questions, in the process of doing so, I had lost something very important. My voice. Yes. That would be the one thing you really need to record a live podcast. But I came in to work that morning, my mouth full of cough drops and my head full of denial. When I arrived, Pat took one look at me and sent me home. Yeah, it was that bad. So there I was. The day before what felt like such an important day for me, lying in bed, wishing to get back the one thing I needed to do, the one thing I wanted to do. On next week's episode, I'll share the rest of the story, how the interview went, what we talked about, and how the experience fundamentally changed my relationship with stories. In the meantime, take care. Be well. And as we like to say, at the carousel of happiness. Don't delay joy. And we'll see ya next time around.
Beginnings and endings are only pretendings. I'll see you next time around. I'll see you